This is the first rifle that I ever got. Believe it or not, this is a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 Sport 2. 16-inch barrel, carbine length gas system. It was a very basic AR that I've done a lot of upgrades to, including now suppressing it for the first time today. And I just kind of want to see how it performs compared to my more recent builds. So we're going to check this thing out and see if the M&P Sport 2 is still relevant. I've got targets set up at a bunch of different distances. It's windy as hell out here today. We're gonna see how she does. There we go. Welcome back to Sawtooth Tactical. Today we are talking about the Smith & Wesson M&P 15 Sport 2. And the reason why is I've been doing, my last few builds have been more expensive rifles, picking out exactly the parts that I want. But this was the very first AR-15 that I ever got. And I learned a lot with this gun. I made a lot of mistakes as far as upgrading it and customizing it and making it what it is now. But I learned a lot along the way, and this is going to be kind of a review because I've put, I don't know how many thousands of rounds through this thing by now. It's been super reliable, with one little exception that we'll talk about. But I do think that something like this can be a great first gun. You don't have to get the most expensive thing in the world when you're just getting into this. So if you're interested in this, why don't you subscribe and let's get into it. So I got this Sig Tango MSR 1:6 LPVO on this with an offset red dot, which makes it very versatile. So that's why I've got targets set up. I've got it at 30, 50, and 100 yards right now. And if we're doing well at 100, we might take it back to 200. We'll see how it goes. The M&P 15 Sport 2 doesn't look anything like this when you buy one. Not only my fantastic custom rattle can paint job that I did, but even just the accessories and stuff on here. I mean, the rifle doesn't come like this. But that's kind of the point. I'm going to put up a picture on the screen right now of what an M&P Sport 2 looks like when you get it. As you can see, it's very, very basic. And at the time, that was before I'd really gotten as into firearms as I am now. It was my very first AR-15. In fact, it was my very first rifle. And I thought that that, in its basic form, was exactly what I wanted. At the time, I didn't even realize that upgrading, customizing, changing parts out on guns was even a thing. I thought you just bought a gun and that's the way it was. There was a guy in the gun store the day I bought it. A guy that I still see in that gun store all the time at Guffey's Gun and Pawn. And he told me, oh, you're going down a rabbit hole, boy. And he showed me a Daniel Defense Riz 2 handguard. And he said, the first thing you're going to want to do is switch out those plastic clamshell handguards for a quad rail like this. Funny thing is, at the time, when he showed me a $500 handguard, I thought that there was no way I would ever spend $500 on a handguard, and here we are. But that was a long time ago. It does have a different handguard on it now. This is an Aero Precision Atlas R1 handguard, and it was the first full-length M-LOK handguard that I ever owned. It was the major upgrade that was the turning point on making this rifle what I truly wanted it to be. And to be quite honest, it doesn't feel as good to shoot as this 14.5 inch with the mid-length gas system. I noticed that within the first few shots today, and that has to do with the carbine length gas that's in it. I have upgraded the buffer. It's got a Geisley Super 42 H2 buffer in it, which does help a lot. But If I do one more upgrade to this rifle, it will be a barrel with a mid-length gas system. But is that even something worth doing at this point? I've got so many other guns. I like to start new builds. I kind of feel like this one is done at this point and is probably in close to its final form, which is fine with me. So before we get into how this gun has performed over the years and what we've done to make it into a much more usable rifle in my opinion, let's just have a quick word from our channel partner. If you'd like to help support Sawtooth Tactical, the very best way to do that is to click the first link in the description. That link is aura.com/sawtooth-tactical. If you use my link, you get a 2-week free trial. And you can quit anytime, but you probably want to stick with it as I have. What has Aura done for me? Well, I don't get any spam calls anymore. I don't get spam emails. I don't get calls from scammers. What they do is they find all the data brokers that have your information online. They submit opt-out requests on your behalf so that you don't get scammers and spam calls anymore. But they do a lot of other things too. They have a VPN, which just helps to protect your privacy. They've got a ton of stuff and it all comes in at a very low price. If you stick with it after that 2 weeks, it is only $12 a month. I think Aura is pretty cool because they sponsor gun-related channels, which not a lot of sponsors are willing to do that. And it really helps channels like mine be able to produce this kind of content. YouTube doesn't really like to monetize gun-related videos anymore. And so sponsors like Aura make things like Mark 18 builds possible. So check it out. It's definitely worth trying it out for 2 weeks. Like I said, you're probably going to want to stick with it. I don't have to worry about scammers anymore. I don't have to worry about spam calls, spam emails. And that's been really nice. I use my phone for work, and so I have to answer calls that I don't recognize all the time. And none of them are scammers anymore. And I really like that. So again, check it out. First link in the description, aura.com/sawtooth-tactical. I can almost guarantee that you're going to love it. Check it out. So with all of the AR-15s on the market, why did I choose a Smith & Wesson M&P Sport 2 as my first AR? Well, the reason why was brand recognition, to be quite honest. I had never heard of brands like Daniel Defense or Geisley or any of these, higher end brands. I hadn't even heard of Aero Precision, but I had heard of Smith & Wesson. And most people, even people that aren't really into guns, they've heard of Smith & Wesson, right? I mean, it's like Glock, it's like Ruger. These are household names, even among people that are not gun owners. And so when I decided that I wanted to get into an AR-15, I started doing some research on what I was looking for was an affordable but reliable AR-15. And in the limited amount of research that I did, I saw the Smith & Wesson M&P 15 Sport 2 come up quite a bit. And it had that name recognition. Even if I was looking for something cheap, I had never heard of Delton or even Anderson Manufacturing. But like I said, I'd heard of Smith & Wesson. And so I set my mind that that was the rifle that I was going to get. And I even went into my gun store and I told them that I want the Smith & Wesson M&P 15. And Cody, who owns the place now, at the time, I'm sure he knew that I didn't quite know what I really wanted, but he respected my decision and they had one in stock and he sold it to me. And in fact, they just sold a bunch of that same rifle, like 12 of them, to the local sheriff's department or something. So that just made me feel like my decision was even more right. If the police are running them, they must be like the best AR-15, right? Well, how little I knew back then. But it turns out it's not a bad AR-15 at all. Now, it is a cheap AR-15, but it's a decent American-made gun. The barrel, I believe, is 4140. It's not cold hammer forged. It's not chrome lined. It's not even 4150. I'm pretty sure it's 4140 chrome moly vanadium steel. It's got a bolt carrier group that is not even like the full auto M16 cut bolt carrier group. But you know what? This PCG is still the original one. I've put thousands and thousands of rounds through this thing, and it's done just fine. My second AR was a PSA, Palmetto State Armory, and that one, I mean, I've probably put at least as many rounds through that one as I have through this, but I did break the bolt on that one. That has not happened with this rifle. I've probably ran that rifle a little bit harder though, to be fair. It has a binary trigger in it, and I used to run that binary a lot when I was first doing this thing. Bust out the tripod, see if that helps at a little bit of a distance. So what I've done, when I bought this, I didn't even know that you could get an AR-15 with a different barrel length than 16 inches. I just thought a 16-inch barrel is what an AR-15 had. Now at this point, this is my longest gun because I've come to really like shorter barrels. But so what I've basically turned my M&P 15 into is like my longer range gun. It's the one that I have with the highest power magnified optic on it. And when I say that, I mean it's only a 1:6 LPVO. It's a Sig Tango MSR 1:6 by 24. I've got an offset red dot on it. And everything on this rifle is kind of on the cheaper end of things compared to what I usually would choose these days. But they're all parts that do work. The red dot on here, this was the first red dot that got sent to the channel to review, and at the time all of my pistols had optics on them, and so I put it on this rifle as an offset red dot to do the review, and it has just kept working, and so I've kept it there. And honestly, I love having the offset red dot, especially with the magnified LPVO. I think the 1:6 with the offset dot setup is very, very useful. Speaking of cheaper parts, you know, I've been putting mod lights on everything. I've got an O-light on this, and you know what? After all these years, the O-light does still work. And so I kind of feel like it just suits this rifle. Plus, it got the paint job, and so it's staying. As I upgraded and changed this rifle, it went through many iterations. The first thing I did is I put in like a carbine length drop-in handguard, and it was a stupid handguard. It didn't even have M-lock, and so I couldn't really attach much to it, but I didn't know any better at the time. I put some dumb Amazon light on it and like a ridiculous vertical foregrip that like moved. I made every mistake that you could make with this rifle. I used to have the, what's it called, the MFT, you know, the tail hook stock on it. Nothing wrong with that stock, but I've just found what I like since are these B5 stocks. Right now, it's got the Palmetto State Armory match grade 3.5 pound trigger in it, which for a single stage trigger is pretty decent, to be honest, especially for the price. I do have another Geisley SDE trigger here, and I'm thinking it's going to end up in this gun. For a long time, I haven't put it in it because I just felt like this, you know, the Smith & Wesson AR didn't need a Geisley trigger in it. But considering this is the one that I'm going to try to use to get better at long-range shooting, I think having a light, crisp, two-stage trigger would make a big difference. And in fact, I noticed that today, just taking out to 200 yards. I think having that nice two-stage trigger in here will make a big difference. So that will be getting put into this gun very soon. All right, we backed it up to 150 yards. Let's see how that goes. go further? It does have some of the other things that I put in just about every AR. You know, it's got a Radian Raptor charging handle, Radian Talon ambidextrous safety. You know, just some of those things that I like. I like a vertical foregrip, but again, I don't use it like this. It's more of a hand stop for me. But I've got the Magpul vertical foregrip on here. And then, like I said, the optics setup, I like this Sig Tango LPVO quite a bit. Now, I don't really have a more expensive LPVO to compare it to. And at some point, I'm gonna have to build another gun and, you know, do an LPVO build with, you know, a really high quality LPVO. This one was more, like I said, it was going on a Smith & Wesson M&P, and it was kind of at the time when I just wanted to try out and see if I liked LPVOs. And at the time, I had only really owned Sig optics, I think, yet. This originally had a Romeo 5 red dot on it. That was my very first optic. Like, all of my very firsts were on this gun. And so I learned a lot by changing things out on this gun. And in fact, that's what gave me the confidence to start building my own ARs. You know, once I took off the pinned gas block and got the barrel nut off and changed out the handguard, put, you know, low profile gas block on here and put this 15-inch M-LOK handguard on it. At that point, I started realizing that these things are very simple. And so it gave me the confidence to go into my very first AR build. And now I can't really see myself ever buying a factory AR-15 ever again. At this point, I will probably only build them. And this gun is what I learned on. It's what gave me the confidence to get into that. And so I do think that as a entry-level gun, the M&P 15 is a great way to go. How does this gun shoot, and how does it perform, and how reliable is it though? Well, as far as reliability, it's been very, very good. I had one period where I bought some, some Federal, I think 50 grain frangible 5.56, maybe 223, pretty sure it's 5.56, whatever. Practically the same thing. I know they're not, but that was the only ammo that this gun ever had a problem with. And it didn't like that ammo. But after I got rid of that ammo, or shot through it all, it's never had a malfunction since, and it never had a malfunction before that. This thing has been very reliable. In fact, more reliable than more expensive guns that I've owned and shot. 55 grain ammo, cheap single stage trigger, and a lot of wind. We're gonna try a few shots out here at 200 and then go back up close. I decided that I wanted to see how this gun would perform suppressed. And so very recently I switched out the muzzle device on it. I'll do this part off camera for YouTube's sake. To an ASR compatible muzzle brake here. And today was the first time that I tried it with my Otter Creek Labs Polonium K. And I'm very happy to say that, for one, didn't have any kind of baffle strikes or anything, so everything is nice and concentric on here. And also, two, like I said, I did upgrade the buffer to a Geisley Super 42 H2 buffer, which did make a big difference as far as the recoil impulse on this gun. It did soften it up a little bit, and it kind of get rid of that twang that was right by my ear of the standard carbine buffer and spring that was in here, which was really nice. But it also seems like it really helped with shooting it suppressed. The thing felt pretty decent today with a can on it. And while it did feel very long, 16-inch barrel, and then you add a suppressor, that is also why I went with the Polonium K instead of the full size. Was for this gun and my 14.5-inch, so that they wouldn't end up just being way, way, way too long. And to tell you the honest truth, it didn't feel super long to me today. It still felt pretty maneuverable and not even all that heavy. Now, I did put it in the tripod for a while today when I was stepping it back from 100, 150, 200 yards. Just because it makes it a little bit easier at those distances than just, holding it up like this. And it was super windy today. I didn't bring any heavier ammo. I just had some 55 grain. But this barrel might be a 1 in 9 twist anyway, so that might be the right ammo for it, to be quite honest. And it does just have this single stage trigger in it. And this, PSA trigger is not bad by any means. It's nice and light and crisp. It's just a single stage trigger. And when you're shooting a little bit more distance, a 2-stage is nice. Hence why I think that I'm going to put this Geisley trigger in it. But the gun is decently accurate. I feel like every time I missed, it was my fault. Definitely not the gun's fault. So there is that. It's not like a match grade barrel or anything like that. But for, out to 200 yards, I'm sure out to 300 or 400 yards, I'm sure this gun would perform just fine. And I think that putting the 2-stage trigger in it and maybe going prone next time, I'm going to try to take it out to 300. If I do out 300, try to take it out to 400. Because with this 6-power LPVO, when you have it turned all the way up, you get a pretty decent sight picture at those distances. So this will be the gun that I start taking out to greater distances. I do feel like this 14.5 inch, just with the 3-power EOTech magnifier on it, is easier to hit at 100 yards than this gun is. But I do think that with the 6-power LPVO here, once I start taking out to 300, 400, whatever, however far out I can get and still make hits, I think that this optic will be better for that than the EOTech magnifier. And so that is kind of what I plan to do with this gun at this point, is to start learning how to shoot longer distances before I build myself like an AR-10 or just something, something a little bit bigger bore, a little bit longer range. I want to start getting into that. And so I'm going to start using this as my gun to increase that skill set before I get into that build. Gotta say, I kind of love this thing with the suppressor on it. Time for a new carriage bolt on the old target stand again. At least the other ones seem to have held up pretty well. So do I recommend the Smith & Wesson M&P 15 Sport 2? Well, if you're just getting into ARs, I definitely recommend it. I think that it is at an easy price point to swallow. And now they even have the M&P 15 Sport 3, which is honestly probably what you should get if you're thinking about getting something like this. The difference between the Sport 2 and the Sport 3 is the Sport 3 has a full-length M-LOK handguard, which you're gonna want. If I'd known that when I picked this up, I probably would have bought a different gun, but I didn't know any better. And once I put a real handguard on here, it made all the difference in the world. It makes it so that you can mount things like foregrips, lights, pressure pads. You kind of want a real rail on your AR. It also comes with a barrel with a mid-length gas system rather than carbine length. And I will tell you from experience, that mid-length gas system makes a big difference. This 14.5 inch shoots way softer than this 16-inch carbine length. But I do think that the Smith & Wesson M&P series is good. It's good quality. It's been reliable. And I think that it is a great entry-level gun and one that you can really learn a lot about the AR platform with. And you can upgrade it and you can not feel bad about, abusing it a little bit because it's not a very expensive gun. I mean, honestly, I don't feel bad about abusing my expensive guns. But, when you're going to start taking things apart that you don't really know about yet and just beating on it. I remember trying to get this barrel nut off, the original one, and I didn't have the right tool, and I was literally beating on this damn gun. But you know what? It didn't hurt it one bit. And that's kind of the thing about ARs. They are really fun to work on yourself, to build up, to make into something different. I mean, this looks nothing like the way it did when I first got it. And even, I think this was my second gun that I rattle canned. But like doing a paint job on it, you don't really feel that bad about painting a $700-800 gun like you might with a $4,000-5,000 gun. And so there is something to be said for that. When you buy a gun this inexpensive, you can experiment with it, just like I have. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. But I think there's also a lot of value in having a gun that is reliable and decently accurate. And the M&P Sport 2 is both of those things. When I got this gun, I had no idea that someday it was going to be suppressed with this full handguard on it, with an LPVO and an offset red dot, and different furniture and different trigger and everything else that I've done to it. But that goes to show you, how you can learn from the AR platform. And this gun has a lot of history to me. It's the gun that I learned it all on. And so I really appreciate it for that. And I felt like it was time to do a real review on it, just because I've had it for so long now, put so many rounds through it. And while many of the parts have been changed out by now, it is still the same receivers, the same barrel, and the same bolt carrier group. And they are running strong like they have from day one. So if that tells you anything, it tells me that it's a pretty solid gun. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like. Make sure you subscribe to Sawtooth Tactical. Let me know if you have an M&P Sport 2 and how it has performed for you over the years and what kinds of upgrades you've done to yours. I love to hear from you guys and to answer your comments. And from Sawtooth Tactical, stay strapped or get clapped.